I've always believed that the American dream was built on hard work and honest living. That belief wasn't just something I read about. It was what built Miller's Auto Care from the ground up. My name is Jack Miller, and I own an auto repair shop and car wash on the outskirts of Chicago. For the past 15 years, it's been my pride and joy. Every scratch I've polished out of a car's paintwork, every engine I've brought back to life, it all felt like I was building more than just a business. It felt like I was shaping my legacy. This shop wasn't just a career for me, it was my life's work. My love for fixing cars came naturally. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it whole again. And the look on customers' faces when they drive away with their vehicles running smoothly, that's worth more than any fancy office job could offer. Business was good too. Steady income, loyal customers, and enough to keep our family comfortable. We weren't rich by Chicago standards, but we were secure. My wife, Ashley, 10 years younger than me, was my world when we first met. I still remember that night at Joe's Diner where she was waiting tables while putting herself through college. She had these bright eyes and this infectious optimism about the future. I fell for her ambition, her dreams, and that beautiful smile that could light up any room. When we got married, she hadn't finished her education yet, but I wanted to give her everything she deserved. I worked long days and even longer nights to make sure Ashley could finish her studies without worrying about money. I even took out a second mortgage on the shop to fund her MBA program. Some folks call me crazy, but I believed in her. And for a long time, that belief paid off. Ashley blossomed with the opportunities one provided. She worked her way up from entry-level positions to becoming a respected financial advisor. Over the years, she found her footing in the corporate world, climbing that ladder one rung at a time. Our kids, Emma and Tyler, came along during those years. They were the light of our lives, smart, kind, and full of energy. Emma inherited her mother's sharp mind and my work ethic. Tyler got his mom's charm and my love for anything with an engine. We had a good life, a really good life. Then about a year ago, Ashley landed a high-paying job at Thompson Investment Group. It was a prestigious firm, the kind with glass offices downtown and views of Lake Michigan. She was making even more than me now, something she made sure to mention at every opportunity. Everything seemed perfect, or at least it should have been. We had two beautiful kids who meant the world to us, a life built on years of effort and love. I was proud of her achievements, proud of the life we'd built together. But looking back, I realized that was when things began to shift. Ashley's new job brought in the money, but it also brought something else, something I didn't recognize at first. She became a stranger in our own home. Her late nights at work turned into the norm. At first, I didn't think much of it. Her new position was demanding, and she'd always been ambitious. But as time went on, something felt off. Ashley started spending more time away from home, claiming she had meetings or after-hours networking events. When she was home, she was distant, almost cold. The warmth in her voice and the playful banter we used to share were gone. They were replaced by short answers and an invisible wall I couldn't break through. Then came the changes that were impossible to ignore. The new clothes were the first thing I noticed. Gone were the sensible business suits, replaced by designer outfits I'd never seen before. The perfume changed too, some expensive French brand that seemed to announce her presence before she even entered a room. Her phone was always buzzing, and she'd leave the room to answer it. I'd catch glimpses of her texting late at night, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her screen. It wasn't just her behavior that made me suspicious. It was the way she looked at me, if she looked at me at all. I felt like I wasn't her husband anymore, just a shadow occupying the same space. The kids noticed too, though they didn't say anything directly. Emma stopped asking her mom to help with homework. Tyler quit telling her about his day at school. They both started coming to the shop after school instead of going home. "Dad," Emma said one afternoon while helping me with inventory, "is Mom okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. How do you tell your 14-year-old daughter that you're wondering the same thing? The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I remember it clearly because it was Tyler's baseball game. Ashley had promised to be there. It was the championship game, and Tyler was pitching. She never showed up. I watched our son scan the bleachers between innings, looking for his mom. The disappointment on his face when he realized she wasn't coming. That's something a father doesn't forget. That night, when Ashley walked through the door 2 hours later than she'd promised, I was waiting for her in the living room. "Ashley, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced at me, her expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. "Can it wait? I've had a long day." "No, it can't," I replied firmly. "You missed Tyler's game, the championship game. He was counting on you being there." She set her designer bag down on our worn kitchen counter, the contrast striking. "I had an important client meeting. These things happen, Jack. He'll understand." "Will he? Like he understood last month when you missed his science fair? Or like Emma understood when you skipped her piano recital?" Ashley's lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't start with this. I'm busy. My job requires dash." "Don't give me that eye," interrupted, the frustration finally bubbling over. "I've supported you every step of the way. I've worked my fingers to the bone to give you the life you have. And now you can't even look our children in the eye." "What's going on, Ashley?" For a moment, I thought she might deny it, might make up another excuse. Instead, she crossed her arms and said something that changed everything. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm seeing someone else." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" "I'm having an affair, Jack. With Richard Thompson. My boss." Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "How? How could you do this to me? To us? To our family?" Ashley's expression hardened. "Because, Jack, you don't get it. I'm not the same person I was when we got married. I've grown. I've moved forward." She gestured around our modest living room. "And you're stuck in the past." "Stuck in the past?" I echoed, incredulous. "Yes," she snapped. "Look at you. You're always covered in grease, wearing those filthy work clothes. Do you know how embarrassing it is to introduce you to the people I work with? He's presentable, confident. He knows how to carry himself, how to influence people. He's everything you're not." Her words cut deep, each one a dagger in my heart. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I had loved for so many years. All I saw was someone who seemed almost proud of her betrayal. "You're ashamed of me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Jack," she said bluntly. "I am. I can't keep pretending anymore. Rich is everything I've ever wanted. He's successful, respected. You wouldn't understand." I stood there, silent, as her words echoed in my mind. Finally, I found my voice. "You wouldn't even be working in that fancy office if it weren't for me. I paid for your education, for every opportunity you've had. I built this life for us. For you." Ashley scoffed, brushing off my words like they meant nothing. "And I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life grateful for that? Get over yourself, Jack. This is about more than money. It's about prestige, about being with someone who dash." I cut her off, my voice firm. "Enough, Ashley. I won't tolerate this. I won't tolerate betrayal, and I won't tolerate your disrespect. If Rich Thompson is who you want, fine, but you'll face the consequences of your choice." "We're done." She blinked, momentarily stunned. Then her face twisted in anger. "You think you can just throw me out like that?" "No," I said calmly, "but I can divorce you. And I will." Ashley's eyes flashed with fury. She cursed under her breath, grabbed her bag, and stormed toward the door. "I'm going out." She spat over her shoulder, her head held high. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of our once happy age. "Oh." I stood there, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. My world had just shattered, but one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything we'd built. And most importantly, I wasn't going to let her hurt our children any more than she already had. As I sat there in our living room, surrounded by family photos that now felt like lies, I made a decision. This wasn't going to be one of those messy divorces where everyone loses. I was going to fight, not just for myself, but for Emma and Tyler. They deserved better than this. And somehow, I was going to make sure they got it. Little did I know, the real battle was just beginning. The next morning, I headed to my auto repair shop, hoping the familiar rhythm of work would clear my mind. I had a couple of important repairs lined up, and keeping busy seemed like the best way to drown out the storm of thoughts about divorce lawyers and custody battles. The shop was my sanctuary. The smell of oil, the sound of tools clicking against metal, the honest work of fixing what's broken. By lunchtime, my assistants Mike and Dave had taken off for their usual sandwich run. It was just me, a stubborn transmission I was rebuilding, and the occasional rumble of traffic from the street outside. The garage felt peaceful until it wasn't. A sleek, silver Mercedes-Benz S-Class pulled up outside, the kind that probably cost more than my annual income. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit that screamed, "I make more money than you." His expression was so smug it could have powered Chicago's street lights for a week. For a moment, I thought he was a client, maybe some rich guy who'd finally realized that dealership prices were a ripoff. But then he strutted toward me, not walking, mind you, but strutting like a peacock who'd just discovered his own reflection. "Are you Jack Miller?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor by existing in my garage. "Depends who's asking," I replied, not bothering to look up from the transmission. "I'm Richard Thompson," he announced, puffing out his chest. "Ashley's boss." Ah, so this was Rich, the man responsible for wrecking my marriage and apparently my afternoon. My grip tightened on the wrench in my hand. It would have been so satisfying to introduce him to the business end of it, but I decided against it. Grease stains on his three-piece suit would have been wasted on someone who probably thought a torque wrench was a new CrossFit exercise. "Talk fast," I muttered. "I've got work to do." He took my silence as an invitation to launch into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "I'm here to protect Ashley from someone like you," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You should be grateful she's even giving you a divorce. I'm here to make sure it goes smoothly. On her terms, of course." I didn't dignify that W with a response. Instead, I reached for another tool and went back to work. My indifference must have irritated him because he started pacing around the garage like he owned the place. "Listen," he continued, clearly unaware that I wasn't listening at all. "Ashley deserves better. You'll give her the house, waive any financial claims, and let her keep the kids. If you even care about them, you're not exactly a role model, are you? Covered in grease, stuck in this outdated shop. It's embarrassing, really." I gave him a glance, then reached over and handed him a greasy wrench. "Buddy, hold this for a second." To my absolute delight, the idiot took it without thinking. The look on his face when he realized his pristine hands were now covered in oil was priceless. He froze, blinking at the wrench like it was radioactive. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Thanks," I said, taking the wrench back. Thompson stumbled over his words, clearly thrown off his script. But he recovered quickly, puffing up his chest again. "You think this is funny?" he barked. "You won't be laughing when our lawyers come after you. We'll block your accounts, take your house, and make sure you lose everything. Ashley has the best legal team money can buy." I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah? And then what?" His face turned red, but he pressed on. "You'll be left with nothing, living in this garage like the grease monkey you are. Is that what you want?" I wiped my hands on a rag, ignoring his rant. That's when I noticed something that made me smile. He was standing right in front of our new pressure washer system, the one we use for the car wash part of the business. the one that had been acting up lately, sometimes turning on without warning. I walked over to the control panel, Thompson following me like an angry chihuahua. He was still spouting off about morality and success, throwing around phrases like alpha male and real man. I nearly laughed out loud when he said, "You're just not in the same league as me, Jack." I looked at him, a smirk tugging at my lips. "You're right, Rich. You and I, we're worlds apart." Then I reached for the controls. "But if you ever need a real man to fix your fancy car, you know where to find me." Before he could respond, I accidentally hit the wrong switch. A powerful stream of cold water shot out of the nearest nozzle like a fire hydrant on the 4th of July. The blast hit Thompson square in the chest, soaking his designer suit in seconds. He flailed like a cat in a bathtub, barely managing to stay upright. "Damn it," I shouted, playing the part of the shock mechanic. "Who messed with the water pressure adjustment again?" Thompson sputtered, water streaming down his face. His perfectly styled hair was plastered to his forehead, and his expensive suit was ruined. "Oh man," I said, suppressing a grin as I turned off the water. "That's awkward. Sorry about that. Although, on the BR, I'd sighed. You were looking a bit overheated. Consider it a fresh start. Karma's funny like that." Thompson stood frozen, dripping wet. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, I thought he'd been struck mute. Then he found his voice. "What are you doing?" he bellowed. "Do you know how much this suit costs? You'll pay for this, Miller. Mark my words. I will destroy you." The sheer drama of it was too much. Just as he turned to storm out, his Italian leather shoes betrayed him. With a sound like a wet sponge being slapped on a tile, he slipped on a puddle and landed flat on his back. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. "Oh no," I said between gasps for air. "Not the mighty alpha male, taken down by a puddle. Somebody call the press." At that moment, Mike and Dave walked back into the garage. Their expressions were somewhere between confused and horrified. "Boss," Mike said, "what's going on here?" Dave," I said, still laughing. "Meet Rich. He's here on important business." Dave, ever the good Samaritan, rushed to help Thompson. As he grabbed Thompson's arm to lift him up, I heard the unmistakable sound of fabric tearing. The sleeve of Thompson's very expensive jacket gave way like wet paper. Thompson's face twisted into a mask of anguish. "My jacket. This jacket costs more than your yearly salary, you morons." "Well," I said, unable to resist, "that's what happens when you mix dry clean only with a Miller Special Power Wash." Dave finally managed to get Thompson upright, though his dignity was beyond salvage. His face was contorted, and he looked like he was about to cry. It was funny, a few minutes ago, he was the alpha male. Now he was a little crying boy who had fallen in a puddle and needed his mommy. Soaked, sniffling, and looking like a scolded toddler, Thompson limped toward his Mercedes. His wet shoes made a pitiful squeaking sound with every step. "You might want to reconsider those terms," I called after him, grinning from ear to ear. Thompson didn't reply. He slid into his luxury car, dripping water onto the leather seats, and drove off. Dave turned to me, shaking his head. "Boss, what was that?" "That," I said, still chuckling, "was karma giving us a front row seat to poetic justice." And with that, I went back to the transmission, feeling like I'd just won the best comedy show of the year for free. But the best part? The security cameras had caught every moment of Thompson's visit. Every threat, every pompous word, and every second of his impromptu shower. I had a feeling that footage might come in handy very soon. As I worked through the afternoon, my phone buzzed with angry texts from Ashley. Apparently, Thompson had told her his version of events. I ignored them all, let them stew in their anger. I had work to do, and more importantly, I had a plan forming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing, G your ground, and letting karma do the heavy lifting. And karma, as Rich Thompson had just learned, has a wicked sense of humor. After the spectacle in the garage, Mike and Dave were practically bouncing with excitement. "Boss, we got to see this on the cameras," Mike insisted. That was legendary. I wasn't going to stop them. In fact, I was curious myself. We headed to the office where our surveillance system recorded everything that happened in the workshop, including audio. As soon as we replayed the clip, we were doubled over laughing again. Seeing Thompson soaked and slipping like a newborn deer was even funnier on camera. The sound of his pompous threats only made it better. Dave burned the video onto a flash drive for me. "You should keep this forever," he said, grinning ear to ear. "Oh, I plan to," I replied, "and I know just where to start using it." Armed with my new evidence, I found a lawyer that afternoon. Sarah Matthews came highly recommended by a longtime customer. She was sharp, no nonsense, and looked like she ate contracts for breakfast and lawsuits for dessert. I laid everything out for her: Ashley's affair, Thompson's ridiculous behavior, and of course, the video. When I played the recording for her, Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "This," she said, pointing at the screen, "is gold. His threats are all there. This will help us ensure Ashley doesn't get a dime more than she's legally entitled to." Which, frankly, won't be much considering she's the one who broke the marriage contract. That's when things really started moving. Sarah began drafting the paperwork while I headed back home. The house was eerily quiet, which wasn't surprising. Ashley was probably out with her soaking wet Romeo. The kids were on a weekend camping trip with my sister. I was glad they weren't around to see this mess. It was the perfect time to get some adult-level housekeeping done. First on the list, protect my assets. I changed all the locks on the house, making sure Ashley wouldn't be able to waltz back in as if nothing had happened. Then I called the bank and froze our joint accounts. No way was I going to let her or Thompson get their hands on my hard-earned money. With that done, I moved on to the next task: packing Ashley's belongings. It was surprisingly therapeutic. Her fancy clothes, expensive perfumes, and those designer heels she never wore, all of it went into boxes. I set them neatly by the entrance, making sure they were ready for pickup. I had just finished when I heard the unmistakable sound of Ashley's car pulling up. I stepped back into the living room and waited, arms crossed. A moment later, I heard a string of colorful language coming from outside. "What the hell?" she shrieked. "Why won't this door open?" I stayed put, smirking as she tried and failed to use her key. Eventually, my phone rang. "Jack, what's going on?" "The door in open," she snapped, her voice dripping with irritation. I answered calmly, "Go to your alpha-wet peacock. I mean, boss. You two are driving me crazy." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end before she exploded. "You can't do this, Jack. You'll regret this. Let me in right now." "Sorry, Ashley," I said, my tone even. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Your stuff's outside. Have a nice life." I hung up before she could say another word. From the window, I watched as she stomped to the boxes, muttering angrily to herself. She loaded them in her car with all the grace of a toddler throwing a tantrum. Before driving off, she shouted something about how I'd regret this and how I'd pay for it all. Her threats didn't bother me anymore. I had something she didn't: the truth on my side. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. Sarah worked her magic, building our case methodically. Meanwhile, Ashley and Thompson were getting cocky. They thought their expensive legal team would steamroll right over us. They couldn't have been more wrong. The trial was set for 2 weeks later, and by the time the court date rolled around, Ashley and Thompson had clearly convinced themselves they had the upper hand. Ashley showed up wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly expenses. Her chin was high, her eyes shooting daggers at me. And Thompson? He was in another one of his suits, strutting like a peacock who thought he was the star of the show. The courtroom wasn't packed, but there were enough people there to witness what would become a performance for the ages. Sarah was calm and collected, while Ashley had dragged along a small army of high-priced lawyers. Thompson sat in the front row, arms crossed, occasionally whispering into Ashley's ear, as if he had some profound legal insight to offer. The fireworks began almost immediately. Ashley's lawyer kicked off with the expected sob story about how I was a negligent, unpresentable husband who had failed her. They painted Ashley as the hard-working, sophisticated woman who had outgrown her simple mechanic of a husband. Then Thompson took the stand. He started by portraying himself as the gallant protector of Ashley, claiming he had stepped in to defend her from my unhinged and violent behavior. According to him, I had viciously attacked him, ruined his suit, and humiliated him publicly. I stayed quiet, letting Sarah work her magic. When it was our turn, Sarah rose from her seat with the kind of confidence that made it clear she'd been waiting for this moment. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has a piece of evidence that will shed some light on Mr. Thompson's claims." With a nod, Sarah played the video from my workshop. The courtroom filled with the sound of Thompson's pompous threats, his attempts to dominate the conversation, and of course, the unforgettable moment when he got blasted by the hose. Thompson's face turned beet red as the video played, and when the clip reached the part where he slipped in the puddle, there was audible snickering from the spectators. Even the judge had to hide a smirk behind her hand. "My client," Sarah said, pausing the video on a frame where Thompson was sprawled on the floor, "was not the aggressor in this situation. As you can see, Mr. Thompson's claims of being attacked are greatly exaggerated." Thompson sputtered, That's out of context." "Out of context?" Sarah echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Would you care to explain what context would justify threatening someone in their place of work and then filing a false claim of assault?" Thompson's team of lawyers looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. One by one, Sarah dismantled their arguments, pointing out inconsistencies and presenting evidence that left them scrambling. By the end of the first day, it was clear which way the wind was blowing. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She was just getting started. And as I watched her systematically tear apart their case, I couldn't help but think that sometimes justice doesn't just prevail, it puts on a show. The second day of the trial focused on the division of assets, custody, and finances. Ashley had expected to walk away with the house, full custody of the kids, and a hefty chunk of my income. But Sarah wasn't about to let that happen. "We have evidence," Sarah said, presenting bank statements, "that Mrs. Miller used joint funds to support her affair, including expensive gifts and trips with Mr. Thompson. This is a clear misuse of marital assets." Ashley's lawyer tried to deflect, but Sarah cut him off with more evidence. She provided old bills and statements showing how I'd supported Ashley's development. Every penny I'd spent on her education, every additional program I'd funded, all the financial and emotional support I'd given her, which she'd so easily forgotten. The custody battle was next. Ashley's team argued that I wasn't fit to be the primary caregiver. Sarah, however, presented testimony from my sister about my hands-on parenting. She even had letters from Emma and Tyler's teachers praising my involvement in their lives. "Mr. Miller," Sarah said in her closing argument, "has demonstrated time and again that he is a devoted father and a hard worker. Mrs. Miller, on the other hand, has prioritized her affair over her responsibilities as a parent." By the end of the second hearing, Ashley's case was crumbling. But the icing on the cake came shortly after. Thompson disappeared. Apparently, he'd realized that being tied to Ashley wasn't worth the trouble. He not only distanced himself from the case, but also contributed to Ashley's dismissal from her job at Thompson Investment Group. Rumor had it that he'd put pressure on the company to cut ties with her. He was afraid her presence would draw further attention to his blunders. At the NAL hearing, Ashley was visibly shaken. With Thompson gone, her lawyers floundering, and her finances in tatters, she was a shadow of the woman who had confidently walked into the courtroom on day one. The judge ruled in my favor on nearly every point. I kept the house, full custody of the kids, and the majority of our assets. Ashley was left with her personal belongings and a stern warning from the judge about her conduct. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Ashley had tried to humiliate me, and Thompson had tried to intimidate me. But in the end, neither of them had the backbone to see it through. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reminder that no matter how much someone tries to knock you down, integrity and perseverance win every time. Life after the divorce wasn't easy, not by a long shot. My focus was on Emma and Tyler, helping them process what had happened, adjusting to life without their mother around all the time. They were old enough to understand betrayal, and they were angry. They didn't want to see Ashley, not after how everything went down. I did my best to shield them from the ugliness of it all, but there were still tough days, questions I didn't have answers to, moments when their hurt mirrored my own. But we managed, day by day. I rebuilt a sense of normalcy. My auto shop kept me busy, the kids kept me grounded, and slowly, the heaviness of what Ashley had done began to lift. Ashley, on the other hand, didn't fare as well. Losing Thompson and her job in quick succession left her scrambling. The woman who had once looked down on me for being a worker was now learning how hard life could be when you didn't have someone holding you up. She reached out a few times, asking for an honest and open conversation. I knew what she was after. She wanted me to be the safety net she'd burned to the ground. I wasn't interested. When she betrayed me, it wasn't just the affair. It was the way she tried to tear me down, humiliate me, and act as if everything I'd done for her meant nothing. There was no coming back from that. She made her choices, and now she had to deal with the fallout. As for Thompson, the so-called alpha male, his downfall came sooner than I expected. It turned out that while he was great at strutting around and barking orders, he was an absolute disaster at actually doing his job. Once the chaos of our trial was over, the higher-ups at his firm started digging into his work. They uncovered a mess of botched projects and poor leadership. He was fired within months. From what I heard through the grapevine, his reputation in the industry was so tarnished that no one wanted to touch him. Sometimes karma works faster than you'd think. 5 years have passed since then. The auto shop is doing better than ever. Emma's heading to college next fall. She wants to be an engineer. Tyler's following in my footsteps, already showing a natural talent for fixing cars. As for me, I learned that sometimes losing what you thought you couldn't live without leads you to something better. I found peace in the knowledge that I stayed true to myself, that I didn't let anyone make me ashamed of who I am or what I do. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the clothes you wear or the car you drive. It's about the person you see in the mirror. And I can look at mine with pride. That's worth more than all the designer suits in the world. And